Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar courtesy of the Kaplan Center. My name is Caitlin Hayes. I'm the Vice President of Programming, and I'd like to wish you all a very wonderful Chag Sameach. I know that Shavuot is upcoming, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the Talmud in light of that. And Sheridan, if you don't mind, could we share our schedule? Just a moment while we bring up the schedule for, all right. So this is our schedule for this year's programming. The Kaplan Center has a lot of exciting programming that's going to be upcoming. We have both webinars and we have a series of dialogues that are going to be planned. The dialogues are mostly going to be surrounding content about questions to use to ask, which is, in my opinion, an underrated tome of Kaplan's that is highly worth exploring. And we also have the Mel School Teen Award that's going to be happening as a tribute in honor of Mel's 90th birthday, alongside his webinar that we're going to be planning in December for that as well. So I hope that you look forward to our programming that we have throughout the year. And please feel free to check in at our website, kaplancenter.org, and keep in touch with us. Thank you, and I hope that you have a good time. Please enjoy the rest of the webinar. I'm going to be passing it over to Eric, who is our academic advisor and vice president.
Hi. Also good afternoon, good evening, whatever time zone you may be in. So it's my pleasure to get us started in the part of the program that is our tribute to Jeffrey Schein, who is completing 3 very successful years as executive director of the Kaplan Center. So it was Jeffrey actually that who called me to tell me that Dan Cedarbaum had died. I remember that afternoon vividly. We wanted to respond meaningfully, both as a Kaplan Center, because Dan was the founder and leader of the center, but also as individuals, because we knew Dan well. We had worked with him for many years and we loved him. But how? We faced a kind of very immediate obstacle in that while we knew Dan very well, we did not know his family as well. So how to move forward? And as we talked about it amongst ourselves, Jeffrey and I think our complementary strengths and inclinations became clearer. Jeffrey reached out to the rabbi who was going to be officiating at Dan's funeral and found out whether it would be possible for the Kaplan Center to deliver some words. And I wrote the eulogy that Jeffrey landed up delivering on our behalf in Chicago. And also he was there to provide comfort to Cedarbaum Jacob's family. I was stuck in Canada because of COVID restrictions. Before I talk more about the kind of programming and partnership aspect of the work that Jeffrey and I did in this kind of pivotal and very difficult year after Dan's passing, I want to say a few words about the little donate button that some of you might remember was on the original Kaplan Center website. It was just underneath this very tasteful graphic of a pushka, of a tzedakah box that Dan had designed and put there. So after Dan passed away, we imagined that people might want to, memorialize him and by making a donation to the Kaplan Center. And when we went onto the website and each of us separately filled out the form to make a donation, we discovered that it didn't work. That you went through the whole process of filling out this thing and it didn't work. Um, and it took so much work for us to figure out why it didn't work and to fix it and to gain control of all the relevant accounts. And Jeffrey gave so much of his time to this task. And I mention this just because leading the Kaplan Center in that first year, especially, required a tremendous amount of detective work. And Jeffrey showed great patience and dedication in getting that work done. When Jeffrey and I spoke after Dan's funeral, it was clear that we shared a desire to keep this Kaplan Center alive. We wanted to continue the work that Dan started, both as a gift to him, especially to see that the many projects that were in process were finished properly, but also because we saw the work as important in itself. And it had enriched us. I had been, with Dan in the Kaplan Center since the beginning and had been involved in most of our significant programming. And Jeffrey had served as educational director, and through that had brought so much richness that I think even Dan didn't imagine originally could be part of the Kaplan Center, because he wasn't thinking of that type of educational work that Jeffrey landed up spearheading for us. And I was on sabbatical, so I had the hours to give. I think I knew a fair amount about the projects that we had in place. I had a good record of what we had done in the past, which proved kind of useful. And I had certain academic credentials. But I've got to tell all of you that without Jeffrey, there would be no Kaplan Center today. And the reason for that is Jeffrey just had and has some essential organizational skills that either I don't have, or I don't have enough of, or simply don't come naturally to me. For example, Jeffrey just knows a lot of people with lots of talent. And his talent is getting people like that to want to do things and to be involved in the Kaplan Center. He can fundraise. He can imagine everything that needs to be done to have a program or just to have an organization in place. He can take people's complaints without becoming defensive. And perhaps the thing that I most admire, he can speak to somebody, and even if the somebody says stuff which are not fully feasible for the type of work that we're doing at the moment, or might be a bit off topic, he can distill from that the part that is positive that we can use, and he can be so affirming so that we all of us who come in contact with him within the context of the Kaplan Center just walk away feeling seen and recognized and appreciated. So here we are, almost 3 years after July 2nd, 2021. And the Kaplan Center is sufficiently strong that Jeffrey can pass the baton to Elisheva, our next executive director, who you'll be meeting shortly. We have a revitalized board that meets regularly. We have a vision of what we want to do in the next years, and we've got the money to get us started down that path. We have a dynamic webpage and many other things. I really still can't believe that Dan is not here. And there are times, and I'm speaking honestly now, there are times I find myself just kind of suspending my rational self. And I imagine Dan somewhere, and he is somehow looking down at the Kaplan Center, even though he would consider this idea absurd, I think. And he is content. And he's very surprised that we pulled this off, that we somehow managed to keep the Kaplan Center alive. And I don't mean that just you and I, Jeffrey, but all of us who are on this call. And I imagine that he respects and appreciates what you've done, Jeffrey, as do I. So I told you about that donate button, but I didn't tell you that every time we had to interface with a company or a financial institution on behalf of the Kaplan Center to solve this and other riddles, we needed Karen Jacobs, Dan's wife, to log into Dan's Gmail account or to speak to a manager on our behalf. And Karen gave us precious advice on how to fundraise in Dan's memory and has given generously to make our work possible. And all of this at a time when she had so much to deal with that was so much more pressing than the donate button on the Kaplan Center website. So it is with great appreciation that I cede the floor to Karen to say a few words about Jeffrey.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for those kind words. Can everyone hear me? I am Dan Cedarbaum's widow, and I've been asked to speak today about Rabbi Schein's stewardship of the Kaplan Center. From a personal viewpoint, I'm honored to do so. When my husband, Dan Cedarbaum, the founder and former executive director of the Kaplan Center, died, there was a big question as to what would happen to the center. As Dan's wife, I wanted to see this achievement, the Kaplan Center, continue, but I did not have the knowledge or the ability to make that happen. Rabbi Schein stepped in to ensure the center's continuation at a time when his life was already full of other responsibilities and projects, all for the pure love of the mission and also in admiration for my late husband. For that, I will always be grateful to Rabbi Schein. To see Dan's achievement continue has filled me with pride and with comfort. And for this alone, Rabbi Schein, I thank you. As Dan's wife, it was wonderful to see that what Dan had created, along with his excellent board and scholarly friendships and relationships, was important enough for someone of Rabbi Schein's national stature and already full plate to give his time to make sure it did not simply disappear. And by the way, Eric was a huge presence in all of this, but I was asked to specifically address the contributions and my personal relationship with Rabbi Schein. The center has something important to say for Jews today. And with each new crisis that we confront, it is Kaplan's vision that helps to steer us to an answer. The center now has been going strongly for 3 years after Dan's death, and I'm grateful to Rabbi Schein for keeping Dan's vision alive. In fact, under Rabbi Schein's stewardship, the center has not simply survived, it has flourished. I have not been asked to talk about those achievements, but I do want to express my appreciation for his efforts to bring projects of particular interest to me to fruition. These include Marcia Falk's Haggadah, which was a project dear to Dan's heart, his work on commemorations for Dan, such as the Dan Cedarbaum Prize for Innovations in Jewish Education that reflected a Kaplanian approach, and the new family prayer book for home rituals, which is in process. This book is designed to bring Jewish ritual into the homes of Jews and interfaith families who want to engage with Judaism in the home, but need a convenient resource to help them do so. It is consistent with Dan's vision in the sense that Dan and I created our own Reconstructionist pamphlets for home celebration of Shabbat, Jewish holidays, and life cycle events. Rabbi Schein's work in keeping the Kaplan Center running and relevant involved not only the substantive work of choosing and working on scholarly projects and webinars, but also the nuts and bolts of running the foundation, as Eric alluded to, including fundraising, hiring, supervision of staff, website maintenance and development, and communicating with our audience and our contributors. In those weeks after Dan's death, Rabbi Schein and I were on the phone or in email contact constantly. Throughout this process, Rabbi Schein was always a strong and comforting presence in my life, keeping me informed of and involved in the center's direction and projects, and allowing me to weigh in on various projects. While I do not have Dan's knowledge and experience, I know a lot about what he wanted the center to be, and Rabbi Schein was always interested in my comments, however vague and undeveloped they may have been. But in addition, Rabbi Schein was always kind, considerate, and comforting. He spoke movingly at Dan's funeral, and he always contacted me at holidays or Dan's yahrzeit with his thoughts and best wishes. He was tolerant of my shortcomings, frequently involving missing or resetting meetings, for example, and he never lost his temper. He is truly an old school gentleman of the type that is so rare today, and frankly, that we need more of today. Along the lines of Eric's remarks, he is not quick to be annoyed or insulted. He never puts the personal ahead of the professional. He keeps his sense of humor always, including in many amusing emails and observations and little jokes that he would send from time to time, and his thoughts and things that came to him and that he wanted to share with me, and I'm sure he does with others. He's always positive and always acting ethically and honorably. I would say that Rabbi Schein is a real grown-up, and people who know me know that this is the highest compliment. Thank you, Rabbi Schein, for all you have done for the center and for me and my family. I hope you remain involved in the center, but also enjoy this well-deserved lightening of your many responsibilities. I am honored, and Dan would have been honored, to know how much time, care, knowledge, and expertise you committed to the center. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. It's been a pleasure continuing our friendship and knowing that how much Jeff has done to keep the Kaplan Center alive. I'm Jane Susswine, president of the Kaplan Center, and it's been my pleasure to work with Jeffrey and our wonderful board for the past 2 years. All the naughty details that Eric described, most of those were settled by the time I took on the job, except the IRS. That was, Jeff spent much more time with the IRS and our tax exempt status than I'm sure he would have liked. Jeff is a marvel. The depth and breadth of his knowledge and creativity continues to astound me. His connections in the Jewish world are long-standing and wide, and he takes advantage of them. We've benefited from them in our numerous publications and in the wide range of webinars coordinated with our own wonderful Eric Kaplan. From the remarkable renaissance of Yiddish in Sweden, who would imagine, to Kaplan and Musar, to thoughtful reflections on a new Zionism. We have a lot about Israel on our website. Dear to Jeffrey's heart, as we all know, is his newest venture, the Contemporary Talmud page. We thank all of you for your very generous support of this welcome addition to our website. Your generosity has exceeded our expectations. Although he will be retiring in a few weeks, Jeffrey has worked with our new VP of Programming, Caitlin Hayes, to assemble a full roster of exciting webinars for next year. So we are all set. Watch your emails. It was posted at the beginning of the webinar, and you will get information as they come along. Always the teacher, Jeffrey has created a curriculum for next year for a full year of Kaplan study. Amazing, geared to folks of various exposures to Kaplan. Here's a sense of it, and it's many, many pages. You will all get a copy of this, and I hope you will take advantage of it and present it to your congregations or your communities for study. In Jeffrey's book, Text Me, Ancient Jewish Wisdom Meets Contemporary Technology. He describes our relationship to technology in terms of digital natives, our kids, and digital immigrants, those of us with the gray hair. How apt for those of us immigrants with one foot in the old country is a pen and pencil or typewriter. It is such a fruitful metaphor, and I have used it often. I actually was at a webinar this morning where it was particularly apt. All folks my age who couldn't get anything straight. Jeff's family is here and on the website, many of them. It is such a delight seeing him kvel over Caleb and seeing Caleb's punim when he comes to visit and hearing stories of his visits to California. I am delighted, as we all are, that Jeffrey will be remaining on the Kaplan Center board as our senior education consultant. We look forward to being enriched by his teaching and continue. And now to our featured speaker, Rabbi Mira Wasserman. Mira is director of the Center for Jewish Ethics and associate professor of rabbinic literature at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. In connection with the Ethics Center, she engages in public scholarship on race, gender, and Jewish ethics. Her research focuses on the art of the Babylonian Talmud and how the Talmud can be deployed to support contemporary Jewish ethics. So she's the perfect choice to reflect on Jeffrey's contemporary Talmud pages. Mira?
Thank you so much. It is such a delight to be part of this celebration. The Scheins were an abiding presence in my early childhood in Philadelphia. And in recent years, it has been a great opportunity to reconnect with them, and especially with Rabbi Schein. It means a lot to me to have this chance to honor Jeffrey's leadership because of his long connection with my family. And I especially want to acknowledge the way that Jeffrey enacts the value of midor lador, from generation to generation, because Jeffrey does not merely pass on his learning to the next generation. He lets the next generation take its place alongside him, giving his students the honor of becoming colleagues and partners. So thank you, Jeffrey, for the chance to be in conversation with you today. Now I'm going to share my screen. Okay, and while I'm sharing my screen, I can't see anybody. And so if there's trouble with sound, or if you have any comments or questions, you'll just have to unmute and let me know. Today, I want to offer a history of the Talmudic page, the iconic representation of Jewish learning that is the foundation for the Kaplan Center's contemporary Talmud pages. While this image of the Talmud page has come to be emblematic of Jewish tradition, it is actually a pretty recent development, emerging in this specific form only at the end of the 19th century. So I'm going to offer a very brisk walk through the history of Talmudic forms, and then use the Talmudic page as a springboard for sharing some reflections about how Talmudic traditions can be a resource for Jews today. And actually, at that point, I hope it will be a conversation that others participate in as well. I'm going to highlight 4 major transformations in the development of the Talmud, beginning with the Talmud's emergence as an oral tradition. And then we'll talk about written Talmud. And then we'll talk about printed Talmud. And finally, we'll get to digital Talmud, the most recent transformation that Jeffrey has helped us theorize in the book, Text Me. So when we talk about oral Torah, the term actually has 3 distinct meanings. Most basically, it can refer to the entire library of rabbinic works, just a name that we use to identify the Talmud and the Mishnah, as opposed to the written Torah, which is scripture, the Bible. But it also has two other connotations. On the one hand, it's often used to refer to the value of revelation and transmission. And on the other hand, it's sometimes used to refer to the value of ongoing discovery and expansion. And I want to take a moment to explore these three distinctive meanings of the term oral Torah, one by one. First, it's helpful just to give a quick overview of what makes up the oral Torah when we use it as a name for the rabbinic library. And even though I'm using the language of library and talking about books, it's really important to emphasize that all these works of the rabbis remained oral traditions for hundreds of years. They were received and studied and transmitted exclusively through oral processes of repetition and recitation. So the earliest work of oral Torah is the Mishnah. It reflects the teachings and traditions of rabbis who lived in the last years that the Second Temple in Jerusalem was still standing. And through the 2nd century of the Common Era, and it was probably edited, by which we don't mean written down, we mean consolidated into a standard format and regular shape in 220 CE around. As soon as the Mishnah was completed, it moved to the center of the rabbinic curriculum, both for the rabbinic community who studied in academies in the land of Israel, and for those who were part of the emerging rabbinic center in Babylonia. And so we actually have two Talmuds. The Talmuds are the Mishnah plus later rabbis' discussions of the Mishnah, also known as the Gemara, but there is a Palestinian Talmud created by the rabbis of the land of Israel and finished around 400 CE. And there is a Babylonian Talmud, which was finished around 600 CE. And generally, when we are talking about the Talmud, it's the Babylonian Talmud, this later, more extensive work that we're talking about. But besides the Mishnah and the two Talmuds, another important aspect of oral Torah, another part of the library, are the many works of Midrash, which were works of biblical interpretation created across all of these centuries of the rabbinic period. So that's one way we have of talking about oral Torah, of talking about these discrete works that were created by rabbis and passed on orally during this time. But according to Professor Elizabeth Shanks Alexander, there are actually two different distinctive ways of conceiving of oral Torah, two different ways of thinking about what is essentially and distinctively oral about the oral Torah. And Professor Alexander argues that these two views, two very different views, can both be found across the works of the rabbis. So the first concept of oral Torah, of what's special about the orality of rabbinic works, is that oral transmission creates an unbroken chain of tradition going back to Mount Sinai. In the ancient view, when things are passed on orally, they're seen as very secure, not like a game of telephone that kids play today when we delight in how the message becomes garbled, ever more garbled each time it is passed along. But for ancient people, there was a sense that holding something in mind, in heart, memorizing it, was a more reliable mode of conservation and transmission than writing would be. So sometimes when oral Torah is invoked by the rabbis, it is with this value of a tradition that is passed on from generation to generation, totally reliably from teacher to student, alongside a written Torah. And according to this first view, it's the nature of oral Torah not to change, but to be a reliable, unchanging tradition. Alongside that idea of oral Torah, there's another very, very different idea about what makes oral Torah distinctively oral. And here's a quote from Professor Alexander. She talks about the idea that oral Torah, as opposed to written Torah, is dynamic and ever changing. She writes, oral Torah would seem to have more to do with the dynamic encounter among sacred text teacher and student than with the stability of tradition enabled by technologies of memory. So according to the second notion of the orality of oral Torah is always changing with each new encounter between text and teacher and student. These two views of oral Torah both have their place within the rabbinic tradition. Most famously, the opening line of Pirkei Avot regards oral Torah as a reliable tradition of revelation and transmission. Moses received the Torah from Sinai and transmitted it to Joshua, Joshua to the elders to the prophets, and the prophets transmitted it to the men of the great assembly. This is a picture of a tradition that gets passed alongside written Torah, unchanging from generation to generation. But alongside that, we have other beloved texts in the rabbinic library which celebrate oral Torah as something that is continually expanding through multiple interpretations. And here I have a citation from a very famous story from the Talmud about how Moses questions the need for God to attend to all the tiny little details of the written text. He says, God, why should you bother with all of this? And God answers, speaking of Rabbi Akiva, that one day there will be heaps and heaps and heaps of laws and interpretations on every little crownlet within the written Torah. So in this version of the idea of oral Torah is an expansion upon the written Torah. Another place these two rabbinic values can both be seen is in Pirkei Avot, where we read that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 beloved disciples. I'll just highlight 2 of them. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai praises Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus as a plastered cistern that loses not a drop. So in that image of the plastered cistern, if we imagine Torah as water, this is really a celebration of oral Torah as memorization, revelation that is transmitted reliably. But in contrast, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach is praised by his teacher for being an overflowing spring. And here we have a sense that the teacher is celebrating his students' dynamic engagement with an expansive oral Torah. And in the Talmud itself, there's different language assigned to these two values. On the one hand, there is the Sinai, the kind of rabbi who is like that cistern, who holds on to everything going back to Sinai. And on the other hand, there's the uprooter of mountains, someone who is so creative, has such a penetrating mind that they're able to create Torah anew. Another place that the celebration of this dynamic sense of oral Torah comes through is in the famous story of the prototypical Chavruta partners, Reish Lakish, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, and Rabbi Yochanan. And I'm naming this the Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud's ethos, because in the end, though both of these aspects of the orality of the oral Torah are valued, I think the Babylonian Talmud really celebrates above all the creative dynamism that comes from multiplicity, from dynamic engagements with teaching. It's said that when Reish Lakish died, Rabbi Yochanan grieved over him greatly. The other rabbi said, "Who can we send to ease his mind? Let us send Rabbi Elazar ben Padat, whose teachings are sharp." Rabbi Elazar ben Padat, went and sat before Rabbi Yochanan, and anything that Rabbi Yochanan said, Rabbi Elazar ben Padat would say to him, "There is a rabbinic teaching that supports you." Rabbi Yochanan said, "Are you like Reish Lakish, the son of Lakish? When I would say something, he would raise 24 difficulties, and I would resolve them in 24 ways. And from this, the tradition would expand." This, I'm suggesting, is the heart of the Talmudic ethos, this notion that Torah can constantly expand through debate, through multiple interpretations, through encounters across differences of opinion. For the generations of rabbis who followed in the footsteps of the rabbis of the Babylonian Talmud, those who taught and studied in academies of Sora and Pumbedita in the area of Babylonia that is today Iraq, the Talmud remained an oral literature for many centuries. Babylonia was the center of rabbinic life, and the leaders of the academies there, known as the Gaonim, were esteemed as the authorities for Jewish law and learning across the world. And so this one Gaon, Aaron Sarjado, used to say, "Whatever students know is from the mouths of their rabbis. Most of them don't know what a book is." For Jews who lived in farther flung places, however, without direct access to the Gaonim, the oral tradition was no longer a practicable way to study. The Talmud was initially written down so that rabbinic teachings would be available in faraway places like the communities in North Africa and Spain. And here I'm showing you a particularly beautiful example of a Talmudic manuscript from medieval Spain. This is from the 13th century. By manuscript, I mean that the text is handwritten by a scribe. So these were very rare and very valuable. But as rabbinic life spread across the diaspora, rabbis and their students were increasingly dependent on scribes to commit the oral traditions of the rabbis to parchment in these books. It was during the centuries that the Talmud was being studied primarily in written manuscripts that new scribal practices arose within the Christian world that would eventually be adopted by Jewish scribes as well. So here I'm showing you two examples of medieval Christian manuscripts that Harvard professor David Stern identifies as models for the format that would eventually be adopted for the Talmud. On the left side, you see a Christian book of Psalms where the biblical text is in the middle with commentary along both sides. On the right side, you see a manuscript where the scribe has done something far more inventive and challenging, expanding and contracting the middle column of text so that it perfectly accommodates the surrounding commentary, such that every single bit of parchment is used. This layout, in which every page looks different depending on how much commentary there is on the base text, is what Professor Stern calls a dynamic page. And here is an example of a manuscript of a handwritten Talmud tractate that adopts the practices of the dynamic page. Here there are two main commentaries, one from Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, the 11th century French scholar affectionately known as Rashi, and the other from the Tosafists, the grandsons and students of Rashi, whose commentary often takes issue with Rashi's opinions. And this page is really useful for the way it demonstrates how challenging this dynamic layout was for scribes who had to be able to anticipate how to use the space so that the base text and commentaries could remain perfectly in sync. So you see here, the scribe runs out of room and ends up twisting the last lines of the Tosafot up the side of the page. The next transformation in the Talmudic text occurs with the invention of the printing press. Now, instead of having to rely on the slow and careful work of scribes to reproduce Talmudic texts, the printing press allows a run of hundreds of volumes at a time. With the invention of the printing press, books of the Talmud become far more accessible, and the text becomes far more uniform and standardized. The Soncino printing house was run by an Ashkenazi family in Italy that took their name from the name of the town near Milan where they lived. They were the first to print tractates of the Talmud. And as you can see in this example of a printed page, they adopted the shape that had already been initiated by some scribes, with the Talmudic text in the middle, Rashi on the innermost side, and the Tosafos lining the outer rim. The first printing of the entire Talmud was undertaken by a leading Christian printer based in Venice named Daniel Bomberg. Bomberg adopted the same layout that the Soncinos had used, with the Tosafot on one side and Rashi on the other, but he applied it to every tractate in the Talmud. And one of the innovations of the Bomberg Talmud is that Bomberg assigned page numbers to every page, numbering each folio with one side called the A side and the other side called the B side. Bomberg's pagination became standard for all Talmuds that have been printed ever since. This means that on every printed Talmud since the beginning of the 16th century, each page has started and ended with the same words. The version of the Talmud page that has now become the iconic image is a version of the Talmud that was printed in the Ram family printing house in Vilna at the end of the 19th century. The version became so popular that it has remained largely unchanged. And here I want to show you the original Bomberg version from 1521 on the left, alongside the standard Vilna version used until today. This is the same page. It's tractate from Tractate Megillah, page 17a. And you can see how close these two versions are in their layout, though the Vilna version has many additions that have been added around the margins. These include additional commentaries and also several important keys which provide cross-references to parallels elsewhere in the Talmud and to codes of Jewish law. And here is a color-coded chart. It's a little hard to read, but it shows the various components that comprise the standard Talmud page. And Professor David Stern argues that this visual layout of the Talmud page, in which Rashi and the Tosafos face off in debate about the Talmudic passage in between them, elevates the principle of dialectic and dispute, depicting a distinctively rabbinic penchant for multivocality, dialogism, and argument. But what I hope our walk through the Talmud's history has demonstrated is that the multivocal principle of the Talmud precedes the layout of the printed page by many hundreds of years, because argumentation and a plurality of interpretations is a core feature of the Talmudic text itself, hearkening back to its beginnings as an oral tradition. Even though the Talmudic text is presented as one solid block of text in the middle of the page, it in fact includes both the Mishnah, which is here colored pink, and the Talmudic commentary on the Mishnah, or the Gemara, which is here colored orange. Both the Mishnah and the Gemara are comprised of many voices. In this sense, the multiplicity that is depicted around the margins of the page can be seen as a visual expression of the heterogeneity that characterizes the Talmud at the center. Not just the surrounding commentaries, but the base text itself bring together multiple voices and divisions of opinion. So there is something fractal about Talmudic discourse in that multiplicity, division, and debate characterize every aspect and phase, from the Mishnah to the Talmud to the ever-expanding world of commentary. But there's one more Talmudic transformation that we have not yet discussed, and that is our own digital age. I want to briefly survey 4 recent developments in digital Talmud. So first is Daf Yomi, which is not digital, but is having a real explosion today. I'll talk about that first. Then I briefly want to introduce you or reintroduce you to Svara, Sefaria, and then we'll close with some reflections on the Kaplan Center's contemporary Talmud pages. If there is one overarching theme as we move from the oral to the written to the printed to the digital, it is of ever widening circles of access. So long as the Talmud is preserved exclusively in the minds and mouths of sages, it remains limited to a small circle of scholars and disciples. As a written text, it was able to travel to distant lands, but the expense of copying each volume meant that access was still very limited. Printing brought the Talmud to vastly larger audiences, and with the digital age, that access continues to increase exponentially. Daf Yomi literally means the daily page. And it was an innovation of the early 20th century, created by the ultra-Orthodox organization based in Poland, Agudas Israel, to promote Talmud study more broadly. Their big innovation was the focus on every single page of Talmud, rather than just on the popular tractates on Shabbat and Kashrut that were part of the rabbinic curriculum. Studying one page of Talmud a day, it takes over 7 years to complete the entire thing. With every new Daf Yomi cycle, the phenomenon has grown, and the most recent cycle includes every kind of Jew, including thousands of women. So here I'm highlighting Hadran, an organization based in Israel that promotes Talmud study for women. And it puts out online courses and podcasts in both Hebrew and English every day. So one of the ironies of the Daf Yomi movement is that even though it is focused on the idea of the Talmud page, many of its students are not studying physical pages at all, but instead encountering the Talmudic material through digital interfaces, online, or through listening to podcasts. Svara is another innovation in radically expanding the circle of Talmud students. Svara has cultivated communities of queer Jews studying both in person and online. Svara has a distinctive pedagogy that emphasizes interaction with the traditional Talmud page and also includes memorization, so that every student emerges from every lesson with the ability to recite the teaching they have studied by heart. And this is Sefaria. Sefaria is the innovation that leans into the technological potential of digitization in the most profound way. They have digitized not just the Talmud, but the whole classic rabbinical library, including variant versions, commentaries, and translations. This image of the first lines of the Talmud demonstrate how digitization has left the iconic visual layout of the Talmud page behind. Instead of crowding commentaries and cross-references on a single page, every possible study aid is now accessible through just a couple clicks, including dictionaries, translations, every imaginable commentary from across the centuries. Each text is completely searchable. In this way, Sefaria has completely jettisoned the iconic form of the Talmud page, transmitting Talmudic content in an entirely new digital medium. And this brings us to the most recent foray into Talmudic transformation, the Kaplan Center Contemporary Talmud pages. Here I'm showing you just a couple. While Sefaria jettisons the Talmudic page, the Kaplan Center leans into the form, even as it creates entirely new content. These Talmud pages are thus engaging the Talmud in an entirely different way than the other innovations in Talmud study I have surveyed. To what extent are these? Oh my gosh, I lost a page. Well, we'll see. Yeah, I want to show you something really what I find very innovative about the Kaplan Center pages. And it really comes out when we contrast them with another earlier experiment in using the Talmud page to explore contemporary issues and ideas. This earlier experiment was from the Shema Journal, and they have these Nishma pages, which I think go back several decades. But what's different about the Nishma pages is that they always put a citation of a traditional rabbinic text, usually from the Mishnah or from the Talmud, at the center of the page, and then invite commentary on those traditional words. The Kaplan Center's Talmud pages enact a very different relationship to the classical Jewish canon and its authority when they replace the Talmudic text with teachings of the 20th and 21st centuries. On some of the pages, the base text in the center is a quotation from Kaplan himself. On the Israel page, the Kaplan excerpt in the center is actually a citation of Herzl by Kaplan. On the multiple civilizations page, it is Rabbi Schein who is at the center, advocating for an update or extension or revision to Kaplan's concept of living in two civilizations. But whether these contemporary Talmud pages are quoting Kaplan himself, quoting Kaplan in conversation with another thinker, or quoting a commentator on Kaplan, they are reorienting the Jewish conversation, shifting the foundation for dialogue and debate from the classical rabbinic canon to a new focus for study. What these pages offer is a Jewish-inflected format for commentary and critique, a thoughtful engagement with key themes from Kaplan's teaching in a form that highlights its multiple resonances across different corners of Jewish life and different disciplines of academic study. To my mind, what is most Kaplanian about these pages, however, is not the way that they put Kaplan's words or concepts at the center, but rather the way they assert a connection to tradition, even as they reconstruct it. So in a moment, I will welcome further reflection and conversation on what is most Talmudic about these pages and what is most Kaplanian about them. But I want to close with a hopeful reflection about the message encoded in the shape of a Talmud page, and a thought about why this form continues to have such compelling power for us today, especially today. For me, the contemporary Talmud pages and all the other Talmudic transformations of our time speak to both the pain and possibility that we are all living with in this moment. There is the horror of October 7th, the heartbreak of the war in Israel and Gaza, but I'm really thinking about the moment before the war, when Israel was a country divided with masses of Israelis protesting judicial change on the streets each Saturday night. And then, with the outbreak of war, that discord subsided in Israel, even as here in the United States, Israel has become a painful point of tension and division. Conflict divides families, campus life, and many Jewish communities. The Talmud page speaks directly to the divisions that we are experiencing these days. At this moment in particular, the layout of a Talmudic page is a promise of a unity that can sustain division and debate. The Talmud page depicts a center that can hold, even when it includes a multiplicity of positions and conflicting opinions. Before the Talmud was a book, it was a conversation among teachers and students, scholars, and colleagues. The Talmud, I hope, can offer a model of encounter, connection, and conversation across difference. And speaking of conversation, I've now spoken a lot, and I will welcome the opportunity to hear first from our teacher and honoree, Rabbi Schein, and then maybe there'll be a chance for broader dialogue and conversation. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you so much for, I'll make more generic thank yous later, but I want to thank Mira for a very stimulating presentation that helps me see an innovation that I saw through a glass darkly, one might say, more clearly now, given your context. And what I'd like to do is just offer some additional Kaplanian grounding to what's behind the innovation. And to do that, I first want to go beyond Kaplan. I'm always saying that, the Kaplan Center, it's always Kaplan and share with the group a discovery that came to me and many, many others in the 1980s and 90s of a different kind of Talmud that was emanating from Israel, sometimes called the reverse Talmud, that was the brainchild of Dr. Menachem Brinker, a secularist scholar, and Kibbutz Oranim, a teacher training center. And the reverse Talmud does a great service to the Kaplanian notion of Judaism is the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people. How does it do this? It takes from modern and contemporary Hebrew literature a beautiful verse and centers it as if it's the Mishnah and puts around it the references and allusions in rabbinic thought and literature that this beautiful turn of phrase by Amichai or Bialik is referring to. So for me, that was quite powerful and a reminder that what we consider the sacred texts of Judaism come out of this whole evolving religious civilization, and modern Hebrew poetry, contemporary North American prose, all the creation of the world are in that sense eligible to be called sacred texts. I'll make one other comment, and here I tip my kippah first to Rabbi Arnie Rachlis, who may be on the call, was supposed to, I'm not sure Arnie made it, and then to both Eric and Mel. And that's a notion that's very important to me, and I think to Kaplan, that there are two Torahs that Kaplan cares about. And Arnie's the one who first exposed me to this notion when I was only a rabbinical student beginning, and he was an older rabbinical student. And I've heard it from both Mel in his sense of always going back and reading what Kaplan has read, often outside of Judaism, and from a very steady, refined sense that Eric has. So what it means that there are two Torahs for Kaplan is that we have the Torah of of Jewish tradition, our sacred texts. And there also is the Torah that comes to us most broadly from science, a little more narrowly from the social sciences, and often from Kaplan's great love of psychology. So when I think about that, the two Torahs, I've written a couple articles for the Kaplan Center employing this notion, most recently Memory on Trial, the two Torahs of Mordecai Kaplan. When I think about this, I think Mira and others about the extraordinary potential and importance. And Rabbi Elliot Dorff is on this call, and he certainly is a teacher of mine in this respect. The great potential of reclaiming Talmudic dialogue in the broadest sense is to take us beyond where two pieces of Torah, of contemporary social science, leave us that I think are very important. One is the 1998 book by Deborah Tannen called The Argument Society, and the other, just out, I've only skimmed it, I hope to read it more carefully this summer, by Frank Bruni of the New York Times, called The Age of Grievance. The subtitle of Tannen's book is From Debate to Dialogue. And I think that along with all the other directions that Mira has pointed us, thank you so much for that. I think the great value here is the multivocality and regaining the notion of sacred argument. Both those works profile how much we've lost it, how argumentatives are reified by social media, but regaining the ability to engage in different kinds of Talmud, and Mira, I much appreciate your distinction between the four, is critical. I can't think of anything more important as an educator and a person in the 21st century. And it is that dialogue, deep and rich, between Jewish sources and whatever we nominate as Torah drawn from social science and psychology. That's a dialogue. It's a deep and rich dialogue, as my colleague and good friend Eric pointed out in a webinar, some teaching in relationship to a webinar about living in two civilizations. He gave us Kaplan's famous insight that being Jewish and American does not mean being 50% Jewish and 50% American, but 100% American Jewish. And that means our discourses are constantly connecting with one another and arguing in a sacred argument modality with one another. So you've given me much to think about, Mira, and all our people on the webinar, but I offer those two comments in appreciation.
Hi, Eric back here again. So as you can imagine, we were planning this webinar, Jane, myself, and Caitlin and Sheridan, and we wanted Jeffrey to know kind of in a very basic way what was going on, but not to give him too much detail so that there would be a measure of surprise involved. And in so doing, we kind of made one error, which we forgot to tell him that Gail Schuster-Busquila, who's a longtime colleague of his, was going to say a few words about him to introduce him before he spoke, as he just did. So I'd like to turn now to Gail, who will also kind of lead us into kind of closing this part of the webinar off and opening it up for, a free conversation amongst us to both talk about what Mira brought up and our just general feelings and appreciation of Jeffrey as he reaches this milestone.
This is too heavy a task for me, Jim, really, Eric. But Jeffrey was my boss But before he was my boss, he was just another guy hanging around drinking coffee at RRC on North Broad Street. But after a year of I don't know what in teaching, I was taken into the Society Hill Synagogue Hebrew School. And I don't know what my teaching would have been like if it hadn't been for Jeffrey. But more than that, you were a boss who inspired me to do so many different things. You were a colleague who inspired me to do so many things. And then I'm very happy to have been your colleague here at the Kaplan Center, because I have felt connected to my great friend and teacher, Mordecai Kaplan, since Dan came to me when I was in Evanston once, many, many years ago, and talked to me. But since we've gone on Zoom, Jeffrey, it's like a different world. And I love this project of the Talmud, because I think it's just visually important to do these things. I don't know where you got the ideas. I don't know how you got them all together, but Ken Yerbu, they should go on, and Ad Mea Vesrim, of course. And I love retirement, Jeffrey. You're going to love it too.
Thanks, Gail. So there's a comment that Avi Winokur put in a personal recollection of a conversation that he had with his father about Talmud that I encourage you to take a look at. But I'm wondering, since there hasn't been a lot of action in the chat, if somebody just wants to unmute themselves and say something either about the material that Mira put in front of us, or some thoughts that you're having at this moment about Jeffrey.
Hi, I'm Elliot Dorff. Jeffrey and I have known each other since the 1970s, I think, when we met at Camp Ramon at Ojai. And then he and Deb invited us and our kids to come to their house at one Sunday, I think it was, for snowboarding. This was during the winter. And then we had, again, Jeffrey was really creative. You've heard of brunch. Well, we had dunch. That is somewhere in between dinner and lunch, right? So around 3:30 in the afternoon. We've all been really, really gifted to have Jeffrey as part of our friends and our family and our teacher. And Jeffrey, Kazak V'amatz Ad Mea V'Esrim, right? I wanted to just mention one thing about what Mira was talking about. We Jews take this for granted, that there's going to be a lot of argumentation and multiple voices. I do a lot of interfaith work, and you need to know that this is not standard operating procedure. For example, for many years, I did a program for the Anti-Defamation League for teachers in Catholic high schools, most of whom themselves were Catholic. And the priest with whom I did it, who's a very bright guy, professor at Georgetown, used to say to his fellow Catholics, we Catholics are good at reception. We receive what we are told. At which point I would tell them, Jews are terrible at reception. We question everything, right? Or just another example of this, I was on a plane from Boston to LA, and I started talking to the man sitting next to me, and he was from Newton, which is a suburb of Boston where there are a lot of Jews. He himself was not Jewish, but his 13-year-old daughter had a lot of Jewish friends, and she was being invited to a lot of bar and bat mitzvah services. And usually he would just drop her off and then pick her up when she called. But one time he decided to go with her, and this was at Temple Emmanuel in Newton, which is the conservative synagogue there. And the invitation said it started at 9 a.m., so they were there at 9 a.m., right? Most of the Jews didn't arrive until 10:30, but okay. So I said to him, with a certain amount of fear and trepidation, because I knew it was going to be 3 hours of Hebrew, I said to him, what'd you think of it? And he said, it was wonderful. I said, well, what was wonderful about it? So he said, well, there was a book at every seat. It had a red cover. He was talking about Eitz Chaim, the Torah commentary of the conservative movement. And I sat there for 3 hours reading this Torah commentary. And so I said to him, well, don't you have that? And he said to me, what are you talking about? I'm a Methodist, sola scriptura, right? So we take for granted that there can be all kinds of commentary around text. But it's just not the case, and among Catholics or Protestants, or by the way, in a lot of other traditions as well. So we really are blessed and of this almost unique ability in our tradition to question things and to have arguments, and along the lines of what Mira quoted at the very end, you can have 24 arguments pro and con, and that way you expand the tradition. And kol hakavod to Jeffrey for helping us do that.
Thank you. Rabbi Zevit.
Yeah, sounds like I'm coming in for my doctor's appointment there, but it's wonderful to see you, Eric. You know, to hear, thank you for your comments, Elliot, and for all the presenters. I have to scoot because we have our annual congregational meeting coming up here in Philadelphia at Mishkan Shalom, and I need to get there on time. But I wanted to hold out on the opportunity both to just give a shout out of kavod to Rabbi Jeffrey as a dear friend and colleague and of great influence to me in my life. Certainly at the Rabbi Jeff Eisenstadt and Sarah Messenger Hotel, we often, our nameplates were exchanged depending on who was staying over in the basement at a given time. So I literally have walked in your shoes, if not the slippers there, many years. There's something that I want to thank Rabbi Mira as well for your Torah, and with the comments you also made, Elliot. I feel that the message of today and the work of the Kaplan Center in lifting up the process by which the source of the universe flows and makes us into self-realized beings, as well as the content that the Talmud was so focused on, are absolutely vital in the way that you lifted up today, and Jeffrey, in the legacy of your work. Because even some of the assumptions, Elliot, that I nodded to, and as someone who does multi-faith work, are now generational. So in younger generations, what you just said is no longer a given within the Jewish world. In fact, the likelihood is, if we were to do the Talmud today, it would be the Facebook page of Shammai, with just Shammai's folks who are friends of that Facebook page, and Rabbi Hillel's with Hillel and with Shammai's comments. So the fact is, there is no one page anymore. And what we need to do is lift up the possibility of this process in an age of cancelization, otherizings, or as Israelis and Palestinians that I work with on the front to say, can you please cease fire North America and get over yourselves, because we don't have the luxury to walk away if we don't like the other person's opinion. Our future is about, in many ways, living out this Talmudic approach to have the one place that we can coexist. So I not only see this as a nice pedagogical tool, but perhaps a key and a salvific force to enable a place that wards off the division and the ostracization that is taking place right now, in which some of our historic tropes are no longer resonant with current generations of Jews, never mind, within other places. So I will take your inspiration to our annual meeting as I invite us to treat each other b'tselem Elohim for the sake of all concerned. And thank you for your legacy, which will continue. It's not over yet. Chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek.
Thanks, Sean. So good to hear you and see you. Ruth Smith sent me a message saying that she wanted to speak. Is that true?
Yeah, I just, I don't know, I can't quite make it. I am a rabbi, but I can't quite do the Talmud thing of making what I want to say connect to the Talmud. But I do want to honor both Dan, Zichrono Livracha, and Jeff in the creation of the camp. Dan was such a supporter of the Reconstructionist summer camp, and that's how I got to know him. He really believed, his love of Kaplan was so strong, and Jeff and Rabbi and Jeff Schein and Jeff Eisenstadt, had such a belief in making these Kaplan principles in the real world. And the success of the camp is completely their vision, and it's so beautiful that we have that. And I wish I could be smart enough, so maybe somebody else can kind of connect it to the written word and how it connects to the written word. But the fact that we have this camp that is so full of, living in a Jewish civilization, living in two civilizations, creating that Jewish civilization is entirely, I would say, Dan, Jeff, not entirely, but they really were the energy behind creating the camp. And kol hakavod to all you for that.
If I can just intervene with a quick commercial. Come November, Rabbi Isaac Sapoznik, the director of Camp Havaya, will be reflecting, it's still the 90th year of Judaism as a civilization, on the passages within the chapter on Jewish education written by Kaplan that make it clear that you can't have a vibrant Jewish life without camp as a context of Jewish immersion and living. End of commercial.
Thank you for the commercial. So this is what I propose as we close things off. Mira, if you have any thoughts that you want to share in response to what Sean or Elliot said, we could spotlight you for a bit of time, and then I suggest we give it to Jeffrey the opportunity to respond to all that has been said, not about Talmud, but about him, and then I'll turn things over to the president of the Kaplan Center, Jane Seiswine, to introduce our new executive director, and then we'll close things off. So, Mira?
Oh, thank you. What I was most moved by was actually, I think we heard similar themes from Elliot and Sean and from Jeffrey, but it's Jeffrey who talked about the sacredness of argument. And I think that's sort of a beautiful note to end on, so that division and disagreement are real, and it's on us to find the sacred and how we remain connected even in the midst of our division. So thank you for the exchange and the dialogue, and the idea that we can somehow get a children's book out of this. That's a fun thing to think about.
Thanks, Mira. Jeffrey?
Yes, the children's book came from the other Schein, from Deborah, and I'll have a word to say about her as well. I do want to take a little bit of time to do thank yous. Originally, I thought Toda Rabbah, thank you, were the bookends and the sum totality of what I would be doing. I wrote a couple weeks ago to Jane and to Eric saying, I'm really comfortable with that. Just let me know if that's not the case. And they wrote back to me and said, well, there's 3 things we'd like to get from you. They can be brief. Well, in theory, they can be brief. I'll try. One is your opportunity to say thank yous. A second is your response to Mira and to the talk. And the third is a little bit of perspective on what these 3 years have been like for you. So I'm going to start with thank yous, go to the 3 years, and end with familial thank yous, which will include Deborah and other family members. So I am so deeply moved by all of this. My heart is swelling, and I want to circle back to the 3 people who introduced me and just say a word about what a precious relationship that has been, a productive relationship. I'll start with Karen Jacobs. Karen, when the Messiah comes, you'll call me Jeffrey and not Rabbi Schein. But until then, I really, as I hope I've expressed of you, develop independent of the Kaplan Center a regard for you as a person and a friend, and I treasure that. And of course, appreciate your deep support for the Kaplan Center. Eric and Jane, I don't know what will become of me when an alarm clock goes off on Thursday afternoon at 3 Central, 4 Eastern, saying it's time for my weekly Kaplan Center conversations during the first year with Eric, during the next two with Jane. And really, I could not ask for better friends, colleagues, partners than I've had in the two of you over these 3 years. Jane as president, and I also thank the board in this regard, and particularly my relationship I've developed with Mel Scult. As I said in a tribute to him on his 90th birthday, I think I'll get withdrawal symptoms when I don't get every week a excerpt from the Kaplan Diaries to preview to see if it can be on our website. Jane, you are a very dear friend. I can't imagine, additionally, anyone who knows Kaplan very deeply. I mean, you worked with Mel for many years. You have a long history. You indeed know Kaplan, and you know the Reconstructionist movement, which is the context for so much of Kaplan. And you've just been the most wonderful partner, and you don't escape your editing duties, which have been so helpful, just because I'll draw them over to the to my work as senior consultant. I've appreciated all of that. Want to add to those thank yous to people who are part of the core staff of the Kaplan Center. One is somewhere in Berkeley doing some sort of pre-Shavuot activity. That's Rabbi Margie Jacobs, our creative communication and webmaster, a wonderful contributor and a great teammate. And the other is the person who's serving as Zoom Gabbai, Sheridan Zuther, who is also jack of all trades, and we just couldn't do nearly half of what we do at the Kaplan Center without her. And finally, a thank you to everyone who's joined the webinar, to the 67 donors, individuals and family households that have contributed and help us really nearly double our expectation of the funds we could raise towards the Contemporary Talmud Project. You'll all be relieved, and I still have a month, so I can do this by executive fiat. We're going to extend the link to make contributions to the Talmud Project, Contemporary Talmud Project, through the end of June, in case you wanted to but haven't had a chance to. But thank you to all the people who have made those contributions. And I'm just going to quickly share how flummoxed I was when Eric and Jane said, well, say a few words about what it's been like. And literally, I couldn't come up with anything until my Jewish text engine kicked in and reminded me of a selection from Elie Wiesel's, one of his early books, Messengers of God, where he talks about, in very important ways, about Elijah and Elisha, two biblical prophets, and how different they are from one another. And yet we know in Chassidut, in the Hasidic thought, it's thought that we all have Koach Eliyahu, an Elijah power inside of us that we can constantly bring out. But they're very different. Elijah is the source of creativity and imagination and messianic vision. And Elisha follows Elijah and has to be much more practical, has to take the ground that Elijah has broken and further till it, refine it. He has to be not flying off to heaven, but he has to be the head of the prophetic guild of Mitnavim, of those who prophesy. And when I think back, and again, thank you for giving me this opportunity, because I wouldn't have thought of it before. When I think about these 3 years, I certainly am appreciative that I had some space for my Koach Eliyahu to write and think and be creative. But that is my comfort place, my place of natural resting. But you don't spend 40 years, 50 years almost, in the Jewish world and community without developing some skills around communication, running an organization, developing a board, making some order out of chaos. And I didn't realize it at the time, but what happened was I decided to use my I didn't decide. It was called on me by Hora'at HaSha'ah, as Maimonides has it, the needs of the hour, to put Elijah to the side and use Elisha because that's what the Kaplan Center needed. And it's been a privilege, and I've gotten much satisfaction out of it. But this is the good news. I am ready. I've already spoke to Elijah. I've rented a chariot from Elijah to send my inner Elisha out to the desert, the Midbar, so I can return to the 3 books that I began, and go back to my my sweet spot of my Elijah self. And also in doing this, I make an exit and I allow someone else to come running in on a chariot with a Union Jack, and that will be my colleague Elisheva, who I know is going to do great things for the Kaplan Center. And Elisheva, I promise you the paradoxical gift of being always present and never present at the same time, so you can make your mark, which I think will be so wonderful. Now to familial notes. My wife, Jeffrey Schein, is often on our Kaplan Center webinars. She's an avid Kaplanian. And you won't be surprised, maybe you will, that at Shabbat, Deb and I exchange the blessings of an Eshet Chayil, fine wife and companion. That's Deborah to me, and she calls me Mi Ha'ish. She sings a line from this psalm, who is a righteous person. And we both blush, and we don't finish those poems. Why? Because we don't believe the religious and moral perfectionism involved in them is really true. Not of us, and probably not of human beings. But Deborah is, I want to be clear, a different accolade belongs to her. She is an Ezer Kenegdo, as the Bible has it. She's my Ezer, she's my support, and in important, wonderful ways, and my partner, the mother of our children, but she's also my Kenegdo. There's tension, there should be, in pointing out other ways of viewing the world and doing things. So it's out of the union of both the Ezer and the Kenegdo that I thank from the bottom of my heart, my wife. And I also not only acknowledge her inner Kaplanism, the fact that she's Kaplanian, and yes, this would be a wonderful book to write, but when I turn to what I hope will be the Keter, the crown of my work for the Kaplan Center, the 21st century vision of Jewish living and learning, I am sure that there's going to be a chapter there. There has to be, about the origins of spirituality in Kaplan's thought, and the way we need to make spirituality something that goes from the very beginning of one's life all the way through adulthood. And Deb, you didn't know this, but while I was swimming before the event, I could see a chapter forming that's a dialogue between us. Of course, you have to consent, but I want you to know how much I appreciate you for all that you are, both as my Ezer and my Kenegdo. Thank you. And lastly, somewhere here, I don't know if my children are still on the call, but they are so near and dear to me, children and grandchildren. And just to recapitulate a little history and to sum this up, when Deb and I moved here in 2015, we're going on our 10th year, it was primarily because we wanted to be more available grandparents of then our 3 grandchildren and now a 4th. Okay, they made it more difficult by being out in Monterey, but we love Hannah and Greg and Caleb just as much. And when we settled in here, I would, our kids knew that Deb was finishing her teaching at Champlain. I was teaching for Hebrew College and for Gratz and finishing the Covenant project that led to the Text Me volume, and I'd begun the Kaplan Center work. They understood that because, hey, we needed to have our own lives. They were supportive. And then little things would begin to happen. So one day, we share with them that we're getting more involved in the Jewish community action here in Minneapolis. So that's good. That's good, Abba. You guys should be doing that. And then we added, I had become the president of the Wolf Park Neighbors Association. Well, that's good, Abba, I guess. And then we add that we became the co-president of Mayim Rabin. And they're shaking their heads a little bit at this point. Okay. And finally, after the Kaplan Center work matured and it was clear that I was going to spend 2 years, only 2 years as an executive director, I think Ben and Robin, you can tell me if it's true, that they were shaking their heads. And here's the way I formulated the dialogue in their minds. You know, Abba or Saba, it isn't only your 3 grandchildren who have to learn how to be developmentally appropriate and act their age. I think their Saba has a challenge in that regard too, and learning how to act his age. Well, you guys, our grandchildren, have done an extraordinary job of growing beyond your age and beyond developmentally appropriate over these last 3 years. I love you so much and so proud of you for that. And your Saba, well, I'm not so sure. I went down the water slide even without Arye when I went swimming earlier this morning. Maybe I'll never act my age. But I do feel so blessed to have loving family, great colleagues, and a great community. And my loving family includes our son, Jonah, and his wife, Rachel, who are just finishing out an Ironman competition. They finished it, but they are in the Chesapeake Bay, so they can't be here. Anyway, I feel very blessed with the family I have and to have landed in life so close to the philosophies of Mordecai Kaplan and the people who are still finding deeper meaning out of them. So I'll end as I began. Toda Rabah. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeffrey. And I'll turn things over to Jane to say a few words to close us off and introduce Elisheva.
As we end this wonderful webinar, thank you, Jeffrey, for your kind words, and to Mira and Eric for all of you who have weighed in on this very fruitful conversation. Before we conclude, I'd like to make a special call out to Jeffrey's grandchildren, Elon, Talia, and Arye. Truly, door la door, such an incredible tribute to your influence, Jeffrey. And finally, I would like, and Caleb, I don't know that he'll recognize this. Finally, I'd like to introduce Rabbi Elisheva Sachs Salamo, our incoming executive director, who will say a few words. And you'll hear much more from her when she begins her tenure in July. Wishing you all a Hag Sameach.
Thank you so much, Jane, and thank you to everybody for being here. And, you know, I wish that I were able to place in a box all of my own admiration for you. Sorry, cats are problematic in this household. The tail appears. All of my admiration for you, Jeffrey, and you know that when you opened it, it would just spring forth and envelop you in the many phenomenal things you've done, not just for the Kaplan Center, but also for camp. I've been one of your admirers since I started rabbinical school. So it's really a tremendous honor to both follow your work and also to maintain our connection and to develop it as we help to make this enterprise even more amazing. I cannot do anything about the cat. She doesn't sit on my lap when I'm not talking. So, you know, Kol HaKavod, phenomenal work. Everybody who has been part of this, we are I think, really going from strength to strength. I'm a bit of a horticulturalist, and one of the things that is amazing about many plants is that, like a grapevine, for instance, you put them in the ground and then you prune them and they shape themselves both to their own nature and also to your needs. And this, I think, is what our tradition does, is that we look at it, we check it, we wrap it around things, we use it as support. And like the plants that regenerate even when we cut them, so does our Judaism. It comes back, it becomes even more fruitful. You know that the best way of having a big crop of strawberries is to get rid of the flowers for the first month or so, and then you have a lot of leaves, and that gives a lot of energy to make a lot more fruit at the end. And I think this is a really Kaplanian idea that he says this. Oh goodness, Mel, please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure this is while he's talking about Rosh Hashanah, is that our lives are subject to regeneration by direct human agency. That every time we look upon something, every year, one of the great blessings of our tradition is that we are granted that opportunity to add more leaves, to flourish, to thicken our growth, to accept more sunlight, and to grow more fruit. And I hope that, as it certainly has under Jeff's amazing insight and oversight, I can help the Kaplan Center to develop, to grow, and to create ever more fruit for generations in the future.
Thank you.
We're done, but nobody has to run off if they don't want to. If you want to hang out for a few minutes and talk to yourselves, talk to Jeffrey, talk to Mira for a couple of minutes, that's definitely doable.
Let me say thanks to all who have made this such a wonderful webinar. Caitlin and Sheridan and Gail and Elisheva and Karen and Eric. Thank you so much.
And Jane.